throughout the meeting. But without further ado, I'll introduce Robbie. Robbie, we're very grateful to have you here today. Robbie Bach worked at Microsoft for over 20 years, holding various marketing, management, and leadership roles. He was Microsoft's first American expat overseas, managing business operations in Paris. Robbie played an important role as the marketing leader in the successful launch and expansion of the Microsoft Office business. As Chief Xbox Officer, Robbie led the creation and development of the Xbox business, including the launch of the original Xbox, as well as the successful Xbox 360. Robbie retired from Microsoft as the president of the Entertainment and Devices division. During retirement, Robbie launched his second career as a civic engineer, focusing on helping local, state, and national organizations develop better approaches to our nation's challenges as a strategy consultant and lecturer. Robbie wrote a book entitled Xbox Revisited, a game plan for corporate and civic renewal. Robbie is also heavily involved in several nonprofit boards, including the Boys and Girls Club, the U.S. Olympic Committee, the Bipartisan Policy Center, and Year Up. We are very grateful to have Robbie here with us today. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Robbie.
Thanks, Abigail. Appreciate the nice, generous introduction. Welcome to everybody on Zoom. It's good to virtually see all of you. I can see some of you anyway. I thought what I'd do today is just talk briefly about thinking through uncertain times and thinking through how we personally and as a community build resilience and the ability to sort of get to the other side, whatever that other side may offer to us. I'll try to do that by sharing a couple of personal stories. And then Abigail asked me a couple of questions that we've talked about, and then we'll open it up to you guys to explore the future of Bungie and Halo, or whatever else it is you'd like to discuss in the video game world or the business world or the nonprofit world. To talk about uncertainty, I want to go back. I'm going to go back pretty far in my life. I'm going to actually, given how old I am, a long way back in my life, to a time in high school, actually middle school. When I was in 7th grade, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, had grown up there. My parents came to me and said, oh, by the way, we're moving to North Carolina. So that was an interesting concept for me. And at the same time, I developed a medical condition called kyphosis, which is a severe curvature in my spine. And I had a 40-degree forward curvature in my spine. And so a week before we moved to North Carolina, I was fitted with what's called the Milwaukee brace, which I'll talk about later in a moment. And we picked up our roots and moved to North Carolina going into the 8th grade. And I will tell you, for me personally, being a 8th grader, moving from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Winston-Salem, North Carolina is like going from Venus to Mars. Let me just, it's a different country. And I was the new kid on the block in the 8th grade in this ugly brace. And I looked like I'd been in a car accident. And it was a really tough time for me. I struggled mightily to think through what it meant to make new friends, what it meant to sort of grow up and go through puberty, and how to think about school and a whole bunch of other things. And through that experience and some things that happened afterwards, which I'll talk about in a moment, I developed over time kind of a theory about dealing with difficult times and about difficult struggles and things that cross our path. So I want to share with you sort of the 3 parts to that theory. And the first part of that life management theory is that faith is an incredibly important part of what we have to deal with. And I happen to be talking to folks who are affiliated with Seattle University, which is the Catholic university. I'm a practicing Catholic, so faith has a specific meaning in that context. But I want to talk about it even more broadly than that. The thing I learned through my transition to North Carolina, my back brace experience, and some other things I went through in life, is that faith is about believing. And in this context, it's about believing in yourself and believing in the people around you. And it's that belief that, to me, is an incredible force multiplier. My mom, when we moved to North Carolina, my mom became my best friend. And she believed in me. And she taught me her view of faith and what that meant. And it's that belief, both religious and just more general purpose belief, that brought a sense of self-confidence to a kid who was completely out of water and didn't know who he was or what he was doing. And as I think about what we're going through now, which is a time of very difficult disruption, and we can all say, well, I'm in a okay place, good, bad, indifferent, I'm safe, I'm healthy, my family's safe, they're healthy, or whatever our circumstances are. This is difficult. This is really hard. And I'm sitting here safely in my office. My family is safe. We have enough resources to get food and have shelter and all those kinds of things. And I will tell you, it's a scary thing for me. And so I've had to go back to that faith belief and say, okay, what do I believe in? What do I know I can do? How do I know I can work with my family and my friends to get through this? And so I encourage people, as you're thinking about the time you're in, to think about what it is you do believe in, and to think about what it is you believe in relative to your own character and yourself and the friends and the people you have around you. That faith, both with a little f and a big F, is a gigantic force multiplier. It is a powerful thing that helps us get through obstacles that come across our way. And I am just such a strong believer, not in an ego way, but that believing in ourselves and believing in our own skills and understanding our own talents is a powerful way to overcome obstacles and get through the challenges that we face. In particular, as you think about, for those of you who are getting ready to graduate and you're thinking about going out into the new world, having faith in your ability to deal with that change is really important. You need to want to go out into that feeling confident that you can make it happen, whatever that you decide that is. So that's the first point. You got to have faith. The second point about being resilient in challenging times is you have to be able to persevere, and you have to have a mental and physical toughness that enables yourself to deal with obstacles that come across your path. Like I'm 58 years old. There've been a lot of obstacles in my life, a lot of good things, but a lot of obstacles. You guys are a lot younger, and you've probably had a few obstacles in your life already. And the bad news is that's not going to change. As you go through the rest of your life, there will be more obstacles. COVID-19 is one, but there will be others. And whatever they are, personal, professional, health, whatever they will be, you're going to have to figure out how to have the perseverance to get through them. I talked earlier about my back brace. To give you some definition of how I learned perseverance, that's where I learned it. So the 40-degree forward curvature in my spine meant that a kid who was playing 6 sports and was a nationally ranked tennis player and was a very active person essentially stopped doing all sports. The brace was, I can't describe this on Zoom very well, but it was a leather girdle that went completely around my waist. It had a metal bar in the front that came up my chest. It had 2 metal bars in the back that came up my back. And then it had a ring around my neck with a little pad here. I had a little strap that I cinched in to tighten it in the back, and then a screw at the top that I screwed the metal pieces together. And I wore that for between 20 and 23 hours a day for 5 years, all the way through high school. And I did look like I'd been in a car accident. And I was an awkward kid going through puberty anyway. This just made it more awkward. But I learned through that a couple of things. One, I learned I was actually really smart. I started applying myself in school and miraculously discovered that I was actually good at a set of things that I never even cared about before. The second thing that happened is my mom basically said, look, you need to go back to playing sports. I come from a sports family. Both my brothers were Division I athletes. They're older. my mom said, you got to learn how to do something. You can't, sit around in your brace all day. So I learned how to play tennis in the back brace. I went on to be a nationally ranked junior tennis player in the back brace. And when I went to the University of North Carolina, I was an academic All-American in tennis. By that time, finally playing outside of the brace, I was able to take it off and play. And I cite all of those things, not because they're some milestone personally or something great I did, but because they are really examples of a learned experience. The ability to know that whatever life throws at me, it may not be easy. I may get frustrated. I may have doubts, but I'm going to deal with it. And I'm going to figure out how to move on to the next level. And I can give you, maybe when we go through the Q&A, I give you 3 or 4 other as challenging experiences that that ability to persevere has helped me get through. So if you believe, if you have faith, if you know and can fight to persevere through the challenges, you get to the third part of my life lesson, which is this concept of serendipity. And serendipity is a really old word, but I think of it as the opportunities that are going to come across your path in life that you weren't expecting. And again, in my 50-some years, there have been so many amazing opportunities that have come across my path that I wasn't expecting, or that weren't in my 5-year plan, and that suddenly I woke up and I said, oh, wow, that's amazing. And my life changed. And so in a way, if you believe and you know that obstacles are coming and you have the perseverance to get through them, serendipity is the reward on the other side. It's the ability for you to see new things that you can suddenly take advantage of and drive. I'll give you the easy personal example, which is kind of a cute story. I'm at the University of North Carolina. I'm a sophomore. I come home from tennis practice and there's a note on my desk. Now, this tells you how old I am. This was a Post-it note, which was a new thing. Post-it notes were invented like that year. And my roommate, who was always on the cutting edge, had left me this sticky Post-it note on my desk. And the Post-it note said, Pauline called. And then there was a phone number. Now, I got to tell you, this is old school. So we had rotary dial telephones. We're at the University of North Carolina, so they're Carolina Blue rotary dial telephones. There is no voicemail. Forget text messaging or anything else of the communications world we live in today. But, I'm a guy, I'm a sophomore, and I have a girl's phone number. So the only logical thing to do is to dial it, even though I have no idea who Pauline is. So I call Pauline, and miraculously, and this is the serendipity part of it, she actually answers the phone. So she's in her dorm room. She answers the phone. I say, hey, this is Robbie. I'm returning your call. She introduces herself. And it turns out we went to the same church. We both were at the Newman Center at the University of North Carolina. And somebody there had mentioned to her that my family had a cottage at Kiowa Island in South Carolina. And she was looking for a ride to Kiowa Island for the weekend. And I happened to be going there for the weekend. But I unfortunately, I said, look, I'd be happy to give you a ride. Unfortunately, I'm going home to Winston-Salem to pick up my parents, and we're driving down together. And she says, that's too bad. I'll figure out another way to get down there. But if you're down there, here's our number down there. Give a call. At least we can get a chance to meet. So we got down there. I called her. And this year we will celebrate our 35th wedding anniversary. So you get an idea. These things happen all the time. These little morsels that get injected into our life that are incredibly powerful. And I promise you that as sad and as destructive as this nasty bug is, right, there are opportunities and morsels being planted in the process. And our opportunity, our chance is to see those, to find them, to grab them, and to figure out how to take advantage of them. And that is there's no science to that. Trust me, it's a complete, it's an art. But if you put those 3 things together, if you believe, and if you know how to persevere and you have sort of a personal resilience, the opportunities, the serendipity that comes into your life is going to create the ability to get to the other side and create the ability for you to get to a different place. And, you know, as difficult as it is to have a school year interrupted in the way it's been interrupted, and, you know, your social life completely disrupted, and people going home and doing classes on Zoom and all the things that this creates, and uncertainty around summer internships and all those kinds of things, it is a time that will create opportunity. So let me close my formal sort of talk by saying the following. As dark as this is, and as strange as it is, I believe that 5 years from now, most of us who are on this call are going to look back and say, that's the time when the opportunity came. And as difficult as it is to be in school at this time and trying to think about internships and trying to think about your professional life and how you're going to support yourself and all those things, it is a time where in hindsight we'll say, oh, that's where the seed got planted. That's the time when things changed. I do a lot of work in the civic space, and I think that, if I'm honest, I think there's a lot of things in our country that are kind of messed up right now. And leave aside Republican, Democrat, left, right, put all the politics aside, there's just some things that just don't work very well. And for better or for worse, COVID-19 is exposing all of those. And that will create opportunity to drive change. And I believe that 5 years from now, some things that were fundamentally messed up before we had this pandemic will be fixed as a result of the pandemic. And that we'll find a way for the world to be a better place and for our country to be a stronger place in the outcome. And so what I wish for all of you is that you can take sort of the same perspective. Think about the challenges that are being created and turn those into opportunity. And think about how you can find the grains of serendipity that are sort of rolling around you right now and figure out which ones of those matter to you, grab them and run with them. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Abigail, and we got a couple of things she and I have talked about, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Robbie. Those are great stories. You shared with us an example of practicing perseverance and resilience kind of in your personal life as a child growing up. Can you share with us an example of a difficult time in your career and how perseverance and resilience helped you through?
Yeah, I want to share two examples. One is from my career, and one is from a colleague of mine career. I think they're both pretty relevant. So we launched the original Xbox in 2001. That seems like forever ago. You know, it's almost 20 years ago. We were in the midst of getting ready to start doing PR and the announcement work on 9/11. And I flew into New York City the morning of 9/11 and landed at JFK the morning of 9/11. And I had an interview with the Wall Street Journal that afternoon at 1 o'clock. And that was actually in a building that's, you know, a block away from the World Trade Center. I went to my hotel at Midtown and went to sleep to catch a couple. I didn't sleep very well on the plane, so I wanted to catch a couple hours of sleep. I woke up at 9:30. I got a call from the chief legal officer at our PR firm. That is not a call you want to get. When the chief legal officer from the PR firm is calling you, you know something is messed up. And he basically said, look, I know your press tour has been canceled, but I want you to know that my office happens to be across the street from your hotel. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know. And I'm looking at the phone. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, what do you mean? I said, I just got up. I just got out of the shower. He said, oh, turn on your television. And the towers were burning. And so, and this is in the midst of us trying to launch the Xbox, which, by the way, was a product that was screwed up from the start. 2 months before I went to New York for 9/11, I tried to resign from Microsoft because I thought I had messed up the project so badly. So I now have a disaster of a business project. I am in New York. It's 9/11. The towers are about to come down. and I'm trying to think about what to do. The guy who was my PR shepherd for this trip had come in the night before. He was in a cab on the way down to the World Trade Center when the first plane hit the tower. He stopped his cab, walked 22 blocks back to his hotel, and called Hertz and reserved a car for the next morning. And the next morning, he and I and another Microsoft person who happened to be in New York and a friend from my church who happened to be in New York got in a Ford Taurus and drove 55 hours to Seattle. And we drove home. And I share that story. And, we came back. The world had changed in a fundamental way. The Xbox launch was thrown into doubt. The team had to rally to figure that out. I got personal issues got to figure out. We launched Xbox 2.5 months later, 1 week late, on November 15th, 2001. And while that product had some market share success, it was sort of a business cataclysm, but it started us on a path to create a great business. And I sort of think of building that business out of the ashes of 9/11. And to my point about opportunity coming from these difficult times, I really think of it that way. I became a stronger person. Our team got more organized and got stronger together. People rallied to the cause because it was, really difficult, and we made things happen. The second story I want to share is from my Olympic involvement. I'm on the board of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, which means that's the organization that runs the Olympics and Paralympics in the United States. There's a fellow member of our board is a guy named Brad Snyder. If you want to Google Brad, it's a pretty inspiring story. Brad was in the Navy. He went to the Naval Academy. He was serving in the Middle East. He lost his eyes, I believe, to a bomb, and now is blind. He came back to the United States. He was an athlete beforehand. He is now a multiple gold medal Paralympic swimmer, and has just been, he sits on the board with me. I help escort him around a little bit. The dude's amazing. He does everything. He's going to graduate school. He's getting his PhD at Princeton starting next year. Now, so that guy is training. He's decided to switch because being a gold medal Olympian and Paralympian in swimming isn't enough. He decides he wants to get a medal in triathlon. So he has been training to cycle, swim, and run blind in the Paralympic triathlon in Tokyo. In the midst of all that comes COVID pandemic. And he's now trying to think through how he trains, how he deals with this. He was planning on competing in Tokyo and then retiring and going to get his PhD. Now that the Olympics is postponed, he's rethinking his entire life plan because he's got to think about, do I want to wait for a year, continue to train? How do I deal with the PhD? Do I defer from Princeton? What do I do? And the guy's blind. And he has to deal with all of these things. And I see him on our phone calls, and he's just smiling and said, yeah, it's no fun, but I'm pretty fortunate. I'm healthy, and away we go. Those kind of people inspire me, and they make me understand this concept of perseverance in a bigger way, and they make me realize that things aren't as crazy as they seem. So to answer your question, those were two long answers and two long stories, but they are sort of instructive of the call to action we have in times of crisis and the ways in which we hopefully can all respond.
Awesome stories. Thank you, Robbie. In times of uncertainty like this, I think many people become paralyzed and don't know what to do. What's your advice to people to make the most of this time? Yeah.
So I said earlier, I'm fortunate. My office is actually connected to my house. I have everything I need here. QFC just delivered our food, literally. So, I'm very self-sufficient. But when this got started, the first 2 days I came down to my office, I had work to do, I had board calls and all this other things. And I was a wreck. I was nervous about everything. I felt the uncertainty. I was reading every article on COVID-19 that appeared in every press report on the internet. And I finally, after a day or and a half of that, had to step back. I called a couple of who have, they're actually professional trained life coaches who have given my wife and I a lot of life coaching advice. And I said, how do I get through this? What do I do? I mean, it's sort of weird. I'm not threatened in any way. And yet I'm paralyzed because I just can't get anything done. My mind is completely occupied. And their advice to me, which I thought was really excellent advice, their advice to me was, look, first of all, get some structure in your life. So instead of reading every article all day, turn off the news services, decide you're going to read the news every morning to make sure you're current, and then shut it off. Sit down and make a list of the work you have to do and some new things you want to accomplish because you're going to have some extra time on your hands and you're going to be at home, you're not traveling. So put a list and build some structure into your day, decide when you're going to exercise, decide what you're going to do, and create a new reality for yourself. And they were spot on, right? I do have to keep up on the news, so I do read things every day. And yet I literally changed the defaults in my browsers to take all the news services off of it. And I literally, now when I turn on my browser, it comes up either as a blank page or into my email, and that's it. And I read the news in the morning, I put it away, I look at my task list, and I say, this is what I'm going to accomplish for the day, and I go and do it. And I make my day purpose-driven. And so if I'm thinking about this at a student's perspective, it's hard for me to transport myself back that far, but literally, you kind of have to do the same thing. You have to say, okay, what's my purpose and direction? What are the things I need to get done? I'm still in school. Okay. So how do I create a new reality around my school life? I still want to socialize with friends. So how do I create a new reality around socialization? I want to stay informed on what's going on, but I don't want to let it consume me. So how do I do that? How do I make sure I stay physically and mentally healthy? And you have to be obnoxiously conscious about it. You literally have to take your hands away from the keyboard and take your eyes off your phone and stop tapping to people and stop tweeting and think about how do I want to create a different approach to what is a little bit of a changed reality for some period of time. And, it's complicated. You're thinking about summer jobs, you're thinking about internships, you're thinking about career stuff, you're thinking about next steps, you're thinking about how crappy it is to have to sit on a Zoom class for 3 hours and do a seminar, all those kinds of things. And yet it's to the points I was making earlier, it's the cards you're dealt. So deal with the cards you got, figure out the way you're going to make the most of them and find the opportunities in it, and create a new structure around what you're trying to do. The other thing I will say that goes through this, which I think is good advice, hopefully, is get help. I have a plenty healthy ego. I have plenty of pride in my own ability to deal with my problems, but it took me calling somebody to ask for help for me to get myself squared away. And there are all times when we need help, and we should take those opportunities and say, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's another student, maybe it's a professor you trust, maybe it's a professional. If you need that kind of help, that's also great. That's what it was for me. The people I talk to are professionals. That's what they do. But find people who can give you help, because part of it for me was just being able to talk through the challenge and being able to talk through the way I was feeling. And just talking through it got me to a different place. So again, sort of a long answer, but hopefully a little instructive on how in the simple challenge I've dealt with it. Maybe that applies to some of the things that some of you on the call are dealing with.
Thanks, Robbie. I think that was really great advice. My next question was going to be, what advice do you have for students during this time? Which you kind of touched on that. Any other last tidbits of advice? If not, we can open it up for questions.
The only thing I will say, I do think the final thing I'll say is, a good chunk of this is about mindset. A good chunk of dealing with this problem is the mental mindset you bring to the situation. And, you know, some of us are more naturally optimistic. I am by nature sort of a guy whose glass is always running over with water. My wife says I'm, you know, the eternal optimist that drives her nuts. So I generally don't have too much of a mindset problem. I'm generally a pretty much optimistic person, but everybody has is on that spectrum in a different place naturally. If you want to deal with these kinds of challenges, you have to have a mindset that you're going to be opportunistic and that you're going to get through and that there's a better place. It's just, I think it's very difficult to deal with this from a negative perspective. And figuring out how you can get your mind into that space, I think is really important. And while it doesn't make scientific sense, I believe that people who have an optimistic mindset and are looking for opportunity end up finding it. And they end up finding great ways to deal with it.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you, Robbie. So now we will open it up to some questions. I think we're going to try to utilize the raise your hand feature. So if anyone has a question, go ahead and raise your hand and then I will. Okay, so Alejandro, you were really on top of it. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question.
Hi. So as I was listening to what you were saying, I kind of heard a lot about you talking from your leadership experiences. So how or what would you recommend to people looking to lead their team or work with others through these hard times?
Yeah, it's a really important topic. If you at some point after this, if you go look at my LinkedIn page, I just wrote a blog post on finding opportunity in this crisis. And leadership was one of the three things I highlighted as being incredibly important to what we're trying to accomplish. And I think the things you have to do on leadership are a couple. First of all, if you're a leader, think through what your natural strengths are and how you can bring your natural strengths to bear on this specific time frame. You know, look, some people are leaders by example. Some people are leaders through authority. Some people are leaders because their subject matter expertise is germane. Maybe you're a biology major, so that gives you a certain way to lead in this case. Whatever it is, find your specific leadership skills and figure out how to utilize them in a unique way that applies to this problem. I think when I talk about leadership, I talk about this as your superpower. So if you were an Avenger, what would be your superpower capability? And think about that. That's first thing. Second thing I would say as a leader is think about, not to mix comic book metaphors, but think about your kryptonite too. We all as leaders have things that we have blind spots in, things that we're not good at. You know, stupid specific example. I ran one of the world's largest video game companies. I don't play video games and I have no technical expertise. So that's obviously a blind spot for me. So I had to think as a leader how to fill that. And in a time like this, knowing your blind spots is super important. So if you're leading a group, find your superpower, find your blind spot, and then surround yourself with other people who fill the blind spot and give them the ability to lead from their strength. And in times of crisis, there is absolutely power in numbers. When things get really bad, you need all the Avengers on deck, not just one. And so it's not so much that you need to be a leader, it's that you need to help organize a group of leaders to deal with this problem. Well, the last thing I will say on leadership on this topic is think about what you're trying to accomplish as a leader. I always think the goal is for people to respect you. It's not for them to like you. It's not for them to always think you're right. It's for them to respect you. And if you're focused on respect and focused on generating respect from others, and if you are respectful to them, in particular in times of crisis, good things will happen. Again, not making a political commentary, but if you look across our country right now, ask yourself the simple question. Between the mayors and the governors and the congressmen and congresswomen and senators and the president and his advisors, are we collectively figuring out what our strong points are, collectively filling out our blind spots, and are we working together collectively to solve the problem? And sadly, I would say mostly the answer is no. We're getting the problem solved through sheer force of will. And if you're a leader, you should aspire collectively to do better than that. And that's not a statement about any one person, because I think there's a lot of blame to go around on all parts of the political spectrum. But we have not, as a country, united as much as perhaps we should have. And I think it's instructive for each of us individually to think, okay, in my own leadership work, how do I prevent that from happening? Great question.
Thank you, Robbie. Great question, Alejandro. We have another question from Michael Ross. Michael, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question.
Hi, Robbie. This is Michael Ross. I was wondering, after looking into your 3P framework that you've created and talked about in your Xbox Revisited book, I was wondering when you started to develop that idea. Was that during Microsoft or was that post?
Yeah,
you had to go through a lot in developing that as a leader.
So it's awesome that you asked that question, because it fits precisely into the comment I made about opportunity. So the original Xbox, I mentioned earlier that was sort of got us into the market, but was kind of a disaster. The original version of Xbox sold 23 million consoles, 20% market share in most places. But Microsoft lost, depending on how you do the math, somewhere between $5 and $7 billion on the first version of Xbox. So at a business level, the business school would define that as a disaster. Joe Phillips, if he was on this call, would say Robbie should be fired and the team should be disbanded and we should cancel the project. Microsoft didn't do that. Bill and Steve said, hey, you guys know more about this than anybody now. You've made all the mistakes you can possibly make. Go fix it. So we literally went to an offsite. There were 8 of us on the management team, and we argued for 2 or 3 days about how to kick off the next version of Xbox. And one of the guys who worked for me is a guy named Jay Allard, who is brilliant, said, hey, we should write 3 pages and only 3 pages on what we want the team to accomplish with the next version. And we talked about what would be in that 3 pages. That ultimately led to this concept that the 3 pages should be the 3 Ps, which is purpose. What's the purpose of the project? What's one sentence that describes what we're going to do? What are the principles? What are the 4 or 5 things that we're going to ask people to act? How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to build culture? What are sort of the soft skills we're going to apply to this project? And then what are the 5 priorities that we're going to get people to focus on? And we're tell people, if you're going to create the next version of Xbox, these 5 things have to happen. We literally wrote that 3-page document. I did a draft of it. People hated it. We rewrote it. I did another draft. People hated that less. We got to the final draft and we published it. That was the birth of what, after I left Microsoft, I wrote the book Xbox 3 Revisited on, of the 3P framework. And I use that in all of the strategy consulting work I do today. And if I see a problem, the first thing that comes to my head is, okay, what's the strategy for approaching that problem? What's the North Star purpose statement that helps me figure that out? What are the principles and the priorities that go with it? And it's stupidly obvious in a way, and there's no scientific research behind it, but I will tell you it works. I'm the co-owner of a little gluten-free pasta company in Kent called Manini's. And when we bought Manini's, Manini's was going bankrupt when we bought it. I seem to like rescuing disaster businesses. Manini's was another disaster business. And so when we bought it, we wrote a 3P framework for it. And, the purpose state for Manini's is making great tasting food for a healthy lifestyle. Really simple. We have a set of principles, one of which is, thankfully, in this COVID environment, our facility will be clean. And we have managed to stay open all the way through COVID-19. We've had nobody get sick. And our business is up 30% because people are eating comfort food in the crisis. So it's really good that you asked that question, because I think, applying strategy to these things is important. If there's one thing that drives me crazy about the nation's response collectively, is that there is no United States strategy for COVID-19, right? There's a lot of strategies, and they're all colliding with each other, and hopefully something good will come from that collision. But in the ideal world, in Robbie's personal opinion, we'd have a unified strategy where we came together and said, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this is how we're going to do it. And that's idealistic, I suppose, but it sort of tells you how important I think strategy is.
Awesome. Great question, Michael. Thanks, Robbie. I think, Robbie, do you have time for one more question?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. So we have a question from Kathleen McGill. I am going to unmute you.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, Robbie. Thank you so much. This is very inspirational. I had read your blog article on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you talked about the new normal. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about what that might look like. So good, bad, or just different.
Yeah. So I think the new normal is probably a phrase that we should not use going forward, even though I used it in that blog post. And the reason I say that is I think it's going to evolve, not be, going from point A to point B. Because I think what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months, we're going to inch our way to how do we open the country back up to some level. But that's going to be open in a way that probably means you don't have 67,000 people watching a Seahawks football game this fall.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that we're going to get there. But maybe it means you can have a group of 25 get together. Maybe. So we're in the process of finding that intermediate phase where we're able to do some things. And there's going to be some compromises and sacrifices there. People are going to have to make some serious choices around privacy. Are you willing to have your temperature taken every time you go into a store or when you go to work? Those are going to be questions that people are going to have to answer. Are you willing to have an app that enables you to prove to people that you've been tested? And to have them be able to see the results of that test? I mean, these are all interesting questions that are going to be in that intermediate new normal. And then what's going to happen, we hope, over time there will be both care options for how we treat the disease as well as a vaccine. And that probably doesn't play until 2021. And we may not get through this, quote unquote, maybe until halfway through 2021. There's 330 million Americans. You want to vaccinate 330 million people. We can't get 330 million people to do a vaccine that, we think is obvious. So getting everybody to get vaccinated on this is going to be a real challenge. Just the logistics behind it are complicated. So I think it's going to take a while for us to get to the point where people can say, okay, at least in the COVID-19 space, things are safe. And look, in the midst of that, we could have another spike. We could regress and have to shut down again. And there's a lot of things that could happen in that. So I think it's going to be some time. Now, final thought on that. In the new normal, I think there will be some things that have fundamentally changed. I will travel less, not because it's unsafe to travel, but because I'll do more Zoom meetings than I've ever done before, because they work and they're easier and they're less expensive. I think the idea, I don't think people will go to working from home, because I can tell you from having 3 kids who are working from home right now, they're tired of it. But I do think what will happen is more companies will move to a policy that is 1 day a week from home. And they'll work to a policy that is more accommodating for people for whom that works better. And that will become a quote unquote new normal for how organizations operate. Facilities, we went to all open facilities where you literally your desk was bumped up against somebody and they were 3 feet in front of you. That's probably going to change. People are going to decide that's actually not a good public health standard. Forget whether COVID-19 is around or not. So I do think there'll be some things that will be different. Final point I'll make, all my answers seem to be long today. The final point I'll make is we'll get to a place that's good. I'm actually incredibly confident of that. I think it will be painful along the way. I think we'll make some compromises, and I think we'll be forced to ask ourselves some really hard questions. I'll close with a final thought. Today, when you travel, you give up a significant portion of your privacy because you go through to travel, you show your driver's license, which is weirdly the only uniform form of identification we have in our country. But you show that to an officer, he reads that driver's license and looks at it. And, you know, that's an interesting thing. What would be the equivalent be like in a public health perspective? And does this ask the question, when I go through that line, do I have to prove I'm healthy to get on the plane? And, you know, why is that any different than any of the other things that we do? This is going to cause a lot of turmoil and angst and force a lot of people to rethink their definition of civil liberties and how we do that. And that's going to create some really interesting conflict in the country, a lot of hard discussion, and hopefully some brilliant answers. But I think we should be prepared for the next several years to be turbulent on any number of fronts. And oh, by the way, we have a presidential election in the middle of all this, just to throw things into complete chaos. So I think that's where we are. I think we should be inspired by the opportunity. This will be once in a lifetime to reshape how we approach things and to reshape how we think about work, personal life, professional life. It doesn't happen that often where you have something this dynamic that opens up this many opportunities. I hope we can all find a way to take advantage of it. Abigail, maybe I'll end by just saying to everybody, thank you for joining the call. I hope it was instructive. I really want to wish the best for everybody. It's complicated, difficult times. Stay optimistic, stay open, communicate with friends, do Zoom dinners, find ways to keep your life in a social balance. And I wish you the best and hope you stay healthy.
Thank you so much, Robbie. That was very, very helpful and very inspiring. Kathleen mentioned your blog, and so I just sent the link to everyone in the chat, so everyone has it. We also are recording this, so if you would like to rewatch it or share it with your classmates or colleagues, we will find a way to get that out to you, so stay tuned on that. Robbie, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Stay healthy.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. Really, really enjoyed it, and good luck.